Well, I would expect using the previous empires, and of course, every one of them Greek, Roman, Persian, Ottoman, you name British they all had their way up, and then they all peaked, and then they all went down. And it can take a long time or a short time. It can be even or uneven, mostly uneven. But one of the things that has very often characterized it has been that the empire at its height becomes an object of envy, an object of jealousy, a model to be replicated in good or bad ways or both, and that the forces elsewhere, by the very uneven nature of human development and of economic development, something, by the way, that was a central proposition of Marx's work, that uneven development means that an empire will go down and either another one will arise or you'll have some sort of multinational, so long as the nation state exists, some sort of multinational um, coexistence, let's say. We haven't been very good about the multinational coexistence part, so we tend to have one empire rising and becoming the next one. And in that process of decline of one and rise of another, nothing is more common than two things. One, the people in the declining empire deny that that is happening. It is often, and for example, here in the United States right now, unthinkable for millions of people. Whatever else they may agree or disagree on, the collapse of the American empire doesn't arise. I give you an example. Last November, when we had our presidential election, neither Mr. Trump nor Mr. Biden nor Ms. Harris ever said one word about a declining empire. That does not exist in those political parties. No speech can be written that refers to it. On and on and on. It is a taboo topic. And the second thing that's very common is the effort made by the declining empire to postpone or delay its further decline, and to do so by impeding the rise of whatever's coming next, a multinational arrangement or a new empire or an ambiguous situation as to which of those two will emerge. And that, I think, is what you're seeing. In my judgment, Israel is like a spectacular example of something that is utterly anachronistic. It's a phenomena out of date, out of time. The last 150 years have been, if they've been anything, a period of anti colonial transformation in which the majority of the world's people have struggled painfully and difficult, and it took a long time to undo the colonialization by Western Europe, North America, and Japan. And Israel is the outstanding remainder. Here we have a settler colonialism in the 21st century, after a century and a half of anti colonialism, trying to establish and to expand a settler colonialism. And it finds the whole world organized against it, which should have brought them to the idea Why would we be doing something that the whole world votes against in every United Nations vote it has ever taken? Not to speak of all the other ways. And why would the United States line itself up with this small country doing something so or anti-historical? Well, the suggestion is they have something in common. And I think they do, that the United States sees in Israel its own project, of trying to hold on to what is unsustainable. And that's why there is such a level of gloom and depression and desperation and dogged determination to keep doing this, because there's an awareness, however dim, that history is moving rapidly in the other direction. The combination of the ancient settler colonialism project in Israel and the explosion of the People's Republic of China economically, politically, militarily, that has got to be a contrast that is stunning. And I know, as an American, and I have my connections here, that the people at the very top are very aware of that contradiction, the China story on the one hand and the Israel story on the other. You even have, in the last 24 hours, the emergence of a strong argument here in the United States, inside the Democratic Party and even inside the Republican Party, that the United States has now, I will quote you, has now paid its debt to Israel. It has discharged its obligation to Israel. Another quote. We can now walk away from this and concentrate on China because we are no longer hanging on to the Israelis. They now have to do it for themselves, which is, of course, absurd, because never have the Israelis been in more difficulty relative to the enemies they have made than they are right now. So, but it shows you that even the extreme right wing, which endorsed the attack on Iran, wants it to be the end of that whole story. And that will help explain the almost pathetic way that the American leadership, other than Trump, he's out of control, but the American leadership wants this to be understood as an attack only on the nuclear facilities, the three cities, not for regime change, not against Islam. No, please, no. Now let us please tell you the very limited meaning of what we've just done. That won't work very well, but the desperation behind it, people should see.
There's a seems to be a difficulty in maintaining a common narrative. That is, initially when Israel attacked Iran, um, Marco Rubio went out and said we had nothing to do with it. And then, of course, Trump comes out and undermined this idea. And now we saw J.D. Vance arguing that, we are not at war with Iran. We're at war with its nuclear weapons program. You know, interesting use of the language. But then Trump comes out tweeting that regime change wouldn't be that bad of idea. Make Iran great again. Get rid of the government. So there's some communication problems, it seems, within, but the pivoting from not being part of this and now going for getting rid of the government. It is quite interesting how they're able to use the language. You did contrast to the difference between a rising hegemon and a declining one. And what is interesting with a rising hegemon is, at least an economic one, is that it's often able to portray itself as a benign hegemon by pursuing a liberal economic or, well, open market system. Because
Yes.
if you have this concentration of wealth, then an open international economy means that the world will use your leading technologies. They will use your leading industries. You will control the land and maritime corridors with, military and navy. They will use your bank, your currency, and your payment system. And, so there's an incentive towards this. Because, if there's anyone sowing fear and distrust, then they will pursue strategic autonomy and decouple from this hegemonic system, which is why you use the word emulate, that others would like to become like it is a source of envy. But in economic decline, though, you see often more reliance on militarism and sanctions to hold the system together. Do you see it the same way?
Absolutely. I mean, the rise of Britain is the rise of the whole concept of free trade, the endless effort, starting, with David Ricardo, if not earlier, to demonstrate how you can conceptualize the economy in which free trade is the best policy for everyone. I remember I have my PhD in economics, so I'm sitting in the classrooms, and I'm a product of American elite education. So I was sitting in Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, arguably the three best universities in the country, and my professors in each place said the same thing to us, giving us demonstrations mathematically, geometrically, empirically, historically, every way you want, why free trade is absolutely the best possible arrangement. And it it was so dominant that it was used as a way of explaining why the British became the British Empire, which is a bit of a stretch, but they did that. And why now the United States was, if anything, a bigger empire because it was even more committed. And this is especially true in the period of the second half of the 20th century, when the Americans were replacing the British everywhere. Asia, Africa, Latin America. Well, the British had never been in Latin America, but that was a deal that the British gave the United States back in the 19th century. You can have South America. But the reality is, look at the irony. Neoliberal free tradeism is in complete disarray now as an ideology, as a policy. It is rejected, it is ignored, it is denounced in various ways. It is, by large sections of the population, blamed for the problems America has today. We don't want free movement of people. That's the anti-immigrant hysteria. We don't want free trade. The leader of the free world is a man who puts tariffs literally everywhere as fast as he can. I mean, you could not caricature the rejection of free trade that this is performing. And then the completion of the irony, which makes your point, China is the great champion of globalization, says so. They make those statements all the time. They're not against, oh no, they don't want tariffs. They want free trade. They want what the British wanted in the 19th century. They want in this century. And the British are running away from that. Not that they matter anymore, but all of the old champions of the free trade are busily learning arguments which, if you're familiar with the history of all of this, you will know that, for example, List and other German thinkers in the 19th century were as busy denouncing free trade because it held back the German Wirtschaftswunder, and they wanted to be able to control their situation. And that has always been a much bigger theme of German economic thinking. And that's not because of something peculiar to the German language or culture. It has to do with exactly the point you're making.
Yeah, that was the 19th century when it was common to refer to the free trade, imperialism, and the alternative to free trade was fair trade, it was said. And I find it interesting that this concept has made its way back. I heard Trump say fair trade a few times, and I thought about industrial capitalism of Henry Clay, Alexander Hamilton, Friedrich List, and the like. So it is, I guess, the era of economic liberalism is drawing to an end.
There is you might enjoy a further irony. The term fair trade has actually, in the last 50 years, been a term of the left in America, in the United States. And Mr. Trump was, because he doesn't know or care, was borrowing this term from the left. Let me give you an example. In many parts of the United States, if you go into a grocery store looking for some kind of food, coffee or sugar, you will be offered on the shelf something called the product, whatever it is, and then fair trade brand of the product. And you'll discover for a few pennies more per pound of coffee or sugar or whatever, you are told this will now go to treating the peasant in wherever this product comes from better. So if you believe that they should be given a decent livelihood in Latin America, where they make the coffee or where they make the sugar or where they make the fill in the blank, you can buy and willingly pay a higher price for what is called fair traded items. They don't have the phrase free trade, but the rest is free trade. This is fair trade. So it's the same people that Mr. Trump denounces as Marxist, socialist, leftist, fascist, because he puts all those are synonyms for him. He denounces them. He took from them the whole concept of fair trade, and again, the beauty of ignorance, uses it to support these people in the United States. He likes President McKinley, a person who most people who are asked to name American president would never remember. I mean, he has zero importance in American history, but he, for a while, supported tariffs in the end of the 19th century. So somebody told Trump this, so he aligned himself because it was important to align yourself with somebody in the American past. He can't do Lincoln because his white supremacists would be very unhappy. So he chose McKinley, which was smart because no one ever heard of Mr. McKinley or has a vaguest idea what he is. He stands for nothing.
That would be a nice continuation. Well, another, I guess, in the a contrast between a rising and declining hegemon would be that a rising one would be making a lot of investments into a healthy society that is, spend on healthcare, educating the public, building infrastructure, things, I guess, often for the common good. But we see some contradictions here, internal contradictions which aren't really addressed or managed. And well, if we look at the United States today, but not only the US, we also find others where it's not really invested in infrastructure to some extent, not in healthcare, not in education. So in other words, there seems to be less investments in the future. And now if you would contrast this with China, it's very different. Now we tend to always look at things as, they're communist Chinese versus, us capitalists. But But the America, again, if we go back to 19th century, America was making heavy investments in these things as well, infrastructure, health, education, and I guess common goods for society.
Yeah, well, I think the contrast is as stark now as I think it has ever been. Let me give you some examples. I'm a professor. I've been a professor in the American university system all of my adult life. When I began, most of my students who got a PhD, which is the highest credential we give, would go on to become academics in their own right. They would become professors in other universities. Now, the majority of my students, and I still teach, cannot find academic jobs. Or if they do, they are inadequate. They don't pay enough money to live, so they will mix a part-time academic job, teaching a couple of courses, with a non-academic job in order to feed the family, in order to literally get by. Very stark. We close colleges here in the United States. I every so often I am besieged by former students who have been professors a few years, and the college or university where they are has closed. And they need me to help them find another position by writing letters of recommendation and all the usual things that we do in this society. So, yes, and look at Mr. Elon Musk, brought in to simply fire tens of thousands of people across all kinds of government agencies, including the Department of Education, the infrastructure building departments of all kinds. This this is not affordable. This is said. It's not affordable, given the fact that we have priorities, which include military. That part of the budget, for example, that is being decided right now in the US Senate, the part of the budget that goes for defense is $100 billion more, roughly, than it was last year. So that's a priority. At the same time, our government is running $2 to $3 trillion deficits per year. That is a serious priority to get that down. Result, economize on every social program there is. And that includes health, education, you name it. It's all being cut back. And this is explained as required by the economic. They don't run away from that. That is required by the economic reality of a national debt that is now 130% of the GDP, by the level of deficits we are in the middle of. And so, yes, everything you say is not being contextualized as a problem of a declining empire. No, no, no. The taboo against that means it's never explained in those terms. It is instead explained as the specific requirements of the historical moment. And by the way, not that it's the major cause, but one of the things that makes the attack on Iran useful is that it reinforces the military dangers and the military requirements of the moment. It will be pointed to shut up anybody who questions the amount of money being shifted to the military and away from the infrastructure and from what people need. It will be the number one political effort of the Democratic Party in the next 18 months to the next election. It will be a relentless effort to suggest that we could be militarily safe and do the social programs, and that if you vote for Democrats, you'll get that. And that hopefully, they hope, will undercut the belief of people that they have to support the Republicans despite the decline in social programs because of the military necessity. That because they don't allow any other issues in, that will probably be the campaign. Or to say the same thing in simpler terms, whoever the Democratic candidate will say, I'm better than Trump and the Republicans because I'm not as bad as they are on these issues. That's it. There is no positive program. There is no social analysis. It's you got a choice between bad and worse. I'm merely bad. They are worse.
Reminds me a bit about a chapter in the second volume of Alexis de Tocqueville. He writes about, I think it was democratic despotism is the name of the chapter. Anyways, yeah, part of the theme as well is that democracies have more ability to go further into this before they meet resistance. Because if you have a failed policy by the government, you always have the assumption that, well, it can be changed at the ballot box, that you have this control, which you don't really have. But it's why it's also interesting. I mean, the people who are sick of the former parties' wars and economic mismanagement, they're criticized by the opposition. Then the opposition takes power, and they just switch roles. But it is interesting that the policies don't change. However,
just a footnote to that: the polling here in the United States, and I understand all the problems with polling, but the polling shows one thing that I think is important that most people do not, in my judgment, give enough attention to. And that is that, yes, Mr. Trump's popularity is going down pretty sharply and pretty much across many different polls. So I'm not relying on one. CNN here does a nice job of gathering half a dozen different polls and then giving the results of the average of all of them. So it's clear that in the latest number, which came out today, 42% of Americans approve of Mr. Trump and 56% of Americans disapprove of Mr. Trump. But here's what the polling also shows: a record number of people disapprove of the Democratic Party because it is so weak as an opposition. In other words, what's really remarkable and what points to the future is that never have the conditions been better for a breaking out of the duopoly of those two parties in our political system. And this is understood above all by the Bernie Sanders left wing. In this country, they're called populists. Bizarre language, but that's it. The populist wing of the Democratic Party is the most likely beneficiary of this. And the greatest risk is that the Republican Party will split because of this, that the disaffection of a whole part of the right wing, which, by the way, is not happy with the events in Iran. That this is the wing that doesn't want to support Israel much anymore, doesn't want war, responds to Mr. Trump when he says no more war, and is very, very upset now by the fact that the wars are not going away. That is going to hurt him politically. I'm very interested in the polls of the coming days and weeks to see the impact on that. But that political situation is now changing. And if you add to that Mr. Trump has been unable to stop the rising prices, they're not rising quickly, but they continue to rise. And for most Americans, that's the problem. It's not the rate at which it goes, it's that it keeps going. And he hasn't been able to solve that problem. And most of the financial press, left wing, right wing, and in the middle, believes we're going to have a recession in the second half of this year or next year or both. You put all that together, and then the Republican Party has got some major difficulties.